In the opening scene, we are introduced to the protagonist, Bobby Reynolds, who is seen attending a job interview. As usual, he is rejected by the employer due to his criminal background. It turns out Bobby has served prison time for manslaughter and is currently on probation after being released from Rikers. As a result, he is deemed an outcast, and his former friends and neighbors do not want to talk to him. Bobby has now moved to an old apartment in East Village, New York, where his lonely mother lived and died while he was incarcerated. Upon arrival, Bobby takes an elevator to reach his room 519 on the 5th floor. While passing through the corridor, he notices a young girl playing the piano outside room 517. As he enters his room, Bobby finds several photographs of his late mother, as well as a pillow bearing bloodstains. This makes him very sad. After some time of mourning, he starts cleaning up the place. In the midst of this, he overhears an argument between a couple, probably the parents of the young girl, in the adjacent room. In an attempt to eavesdrop, Bobby walks out of his room, but he can't hear well. He then continues with the cleaning and comes across a cracked hole in a wall behind a piano. Curious, he tries putting his hand inside, but something pricks his finger, causing him to bleed. He quickly enters the bathroom to wash up his wound and finds some antidepressant tablets, likely belonging to his mother. Not long after, he notices an unidentified person in the opposite apartment window, keeping a watch in his room. However, Bobby doesn't react much to it and simply shuts the curtain. Later that evening, Bobby visits a bar to meet his former girlfriend, Alyssa, who works there as a waitress. He asks if they can grab a coffee someday, but she refuses, claiming that she works double shifts. Bobby then returns to his apartment with a sad expression on his face. At midnight, he wakes up to a strange sound emanating from the living room. As he proceeds to check its source, he is startled to witness his mother's soul pleading for help, but before he can check further, she snaps out, revealing this to be just a dream. The following day, he goes to the Houston auto repair shop in hopes of getting a job. This time, a supportive owner, Hector Rodriguez, hires him, giving him a chance to rebuild his life. But he demands his loyalty and even offers to pay lower wages in the beginning. When Bobby agrees, the owner permits him to join the work from the very next day. Later on, Bobby returns to his apartment, and while on the elevator, he is joined by a police officer, Walter. It turns out that Walter is the father of the same little girl from room 517, who often abuses his family. That night, Bobby once again hears peculiar scraping sounds coming from the floor. While investigating, he suddenly hears a piano tone and discovers blood on its keys. Upon further inspection, he discovers some bloody fingernails wrapped in a cloth inside the piano. Bobby then consults the apartment manager, showing him the nails and inquiring if someone else had previously stayed there before him. However, the manager denies any prior occupants and suggests that the nails might belong to Bobby's mother. He also reveals that his mother had locked herself in her apartment for a week before her death. From the next day onwards, Bobby begins working at Hector's garage. However, the strange visions and sounds continue to haunt him even during working hours. One day after work, he goes to meet Alyssa for a coffee. While walking down the street, Bobby asks if she can give him a second chance, and also invites her to visit his apartment. Alyssa doesn't answer, but she appears to be happy. Returning home, Bobby finds one of his neighbors, Joseph, trying to listen to something inside his room. When Bobby confronts him, he reveals that he hears strange sounds emanating from this room. Joseph asks if he hears them too, but Bobby walks inside without any response. Later on, he is washing the dishes when he again hears the argument between Walter and his wife Gina. He then walks to room 517's door and tries to eavesdrop on their conversation, but inadvertently makes a noise, alerting Walter. As a result, Bobby rushes back to his room and shuts the door from inside, just before the cop finds him. Afterwards, Bobby is trying to fall asleep on the sofa when he hears another sound from his mother's closet. He proceeds to check and finds the place in a complete mess. Shortly after, he discovers a cassette that contains some screaming sounds of his mother before her death. This leaves him deeply unsettled. In the morning, Bobby heads down to the apartment basement for laundry. On the way, he feels a strong presence of someone tailing him. The washing machine also activates on its own without inserting any coin, leaving him puzzled. Meanwhile, Alyssa arrives at the apartment and walks straight towards Bobby's room. Finding the door open, she enters inside and witnesses the same unidentified individual watching from the opposite apartment. Just then, a creepy hand appears behind Alyssa's shoulder, but it inexplicably vanishes as soon as Bobby walks in. The two then have some conversation over dinner, during which Bobby shares about how his mother died. They chat for hours and Alyssa finally departs, but not before kissing him. In the next scene, Bobby again hears another argument from room 517. This time, he decides to intervene, so he bangs on the door and asks Gina if she is okay. He also offers to help if necessary. However, Walter comes out and warns him to mind his own business. The next day, Alyssa comes to visit his boyfriend at his apartment and sees Gina tapping at his door. Misinterpreting the situation, she angrily leaves the place. Later that evening, Bobby is again disturbed by the sound of violence next door. Determined to take action, he walks out of his room, only to find Carly standing in front of his door. He invites her in and asks about the problem, but the frightened little girl remains silent. She is abused by her father, which is evident by the bruises on her body. As a last option, Bobby calls the police on Walter, reporting about the physical violence. While he is on the call, Carly runs back to her room for some reason. A short while later, the police arrive at the scene and break into room 517. In an unexpected turn of events, the room is revealed to be empty as if nobody has lived there for several years. The officers deduce that Bobby has some mental issues, so they give him a warning before leaving. After this, a perplexed Bobby goes to the apartment manager and inquires about the tenant of room 517. Surprisingly, the latter also says that no one lives in that room. Now, Bobby begins to doubt his sanity. In addition, he continues to hear and hallucinate things that are not there. Elsewhere, Alyssa is at her college, talking to her friend about Bobby. Here, she admits that he went to jail because of her. Turns out the pair had attended a party where a stranger approached her and began to assault her. Upon witnessing that, Bobby punched him repeatedly in the face, ultimately resulting in his death. One day, while working in the garage, Bobby is startled when he experiences some blood dropping on his face. He frantically rushes to the bathroom, but by this time, the blood has mysteriously disappeared. Hector notices his unusual reaction and suggests he take a day off. Meanwhile, in the apartment, Joseph is seen preparing dinner, but his attention seems to be somewhere else. Shortly after, he goes to take out some trash when a hand emerges from the trash bin and grabs him. Frightened, Joseph runs back to his room and locks up the door. At the same time, he hears a knock on the door, and upon peeping through the hole, he witnesses a ghostly figure of a woman, asking him to open the door. In a state of panic, Joseph locks himself inside the bathroom. However, he's still not safe as the ghost walks inside. With this face-to-face encounter, Joseph becomes so scared that he succumbs to his fear. The following morning, a detective shows up at Bobby's place and asks some questions about Joseph. Bobby, due to his criminal history, becomes the prime suspect in this death case. Later at work, he learns that a car has been stolen from their garage. Hector has his suspicions about Bobby, so he asks him to return the car within an hour, or else he'll call the police. Our hero is greatly disappointed by this accusation, so he leaves, saying he's innocent. As time passes by, the ghosts of Gina and Carly continue haunting other individuals who have connections with Bobby in the apartment building. In one instance, Alyssa is at her design class when she sees Carly's ghost in one of her mannequins. Terrified, she rushes to the bathroom, but the ghost haunts her there as well. On the other hand, Hector finds out that the car was mistakenly towed away by the authorities. This makes him regret his earlier actions, so he decides to go to Bobby's apartment to apologize. As he gets in the elevator, he finds Carly playing with the elevator buttons. He tries to talk to her, but she runs away. Hector follows the little girl to room 517, where he's greeted by a grim sight: the lifeless body of Carly. Panicked, he proceeds to call 911, but at the same time, the little girl slowly gets up. The sight scares his heart out, prompting him to run for his life, but he doesn't get much far as he falls off the stairs, leading to his tragic demise. A short while later, Bobby arrives home and experiences several visions of Carly walking inside his room and playing on his bed. Disturbed by these apparitions, Bobby walks out to interrogate other tenants about the same. One of the elderly men then reveals a dark history. Years ago, Walter discovered his wife, along with their daughter, attempting to leave him. This enraged him so much that he violently assaulted them. Poor Gina banged on every door of the tenants for help, but no one was willing to intervene, including Bobby's mother. As a result, Walter beat his wife to death and dumped his daughter's body down the garbage chute before gunning himself. Since then, the ghosts of the family have been haunting the apartment and killing everyone who refused to help them in need. Meanwhile, a frightened Alyssa arrives at the apartment looking for Bobby, but doesn't find him in his room. She then knocks on room 517 to inquire about his whereabouts, but finds the door open. As she enters, she comes across the ghost of Walter, who starts attacking her brutally just like he did to his wife. Shortly after, Bobby returns to his room and hears Alyssa's screaming voice. He breaks into room 517 and discovers her in a severely wounded state. Worried, he rushes her back to his room and tends to her wounds. Amidst this, Bobby hears the violent confrontation between Walter and Gina for one more time. He walks out and witnesses the scene, transpiring exactly how the old man described earlier. But this time, Bobby doesn't let the entire scene play out. He intervenes just as Walter is about to deliver the final blow to Gina. This distraction allows her to snatch Walter's nightstick and beat him up until he dies. In the aftermath, Gina looks back at Bobby with appreciation, after which the spirits of the mother and daughter find peace and finally disappear. With the ghosts now gone, Bobby goes back to Alyssa and calls for an ambulance to help her. So watch more movies like this, like this video and subscribe the channel. Good day.